Maltese Falcon is the first great detective picture.
The film works so well because it's more than just a detective story. It has to do with characters, and it has to do with basic human values, greed and lust and love and anxiety and truth and lies.
Success to crime.
It almost defines, in a way, independent film. And it breaks a lot of Hollywood stereotypes in that there's really no good guys or good girls in this movie.
Oh, why do you accuse us?
This isn't the time for that schoolgirl act. We're both of us sitting under the gallows.
The Maltese Falcon endures because the story is compelling and told brilliantly.
In 1941, John Huston's film adaptation of The Maltese Falcon reinvented the detective movie and ushered in the era of film noir. But the road to cinematic immortality began with an inauspicious thud. The film would be made twice prior to Huston's involvement, with less than stellar results.
Got him right through the pump with this. We fired so close the powder burned his overcoat.
Before The Blackbird became part of Hollywood lore, it began life as serialized pulp fiction, written by an ailing, poverty-stricken author whose own life had veered wildly off course. Baltimore-bred Dashiell Hammett had dropped out of high school to help his father with the family business. When the business collapsed, young Dashiell sought opportunities elsewhere. His choice of profession would shape the course of his life, and with it, literary and cinematic history.
My grandfather, at a very young age, became a Pinkerton's detective, and he worked in the Baltimore office under a man named James Wright. And Wright instilled in him the code of the detective, and something that he really internalized in his own life and in Sam Spade's life. The code is creating a barrier between yourself, the detective, and the rest of the world. In part, that means keeping yourself secret and anonymous, and so that you are not vulnerable to the rest of the world. And in part, it's keeping the other side at bay so that you don't have an emotional attachment to your client or to another crook or to really anyone.
Hammett moved to San Francisco in 1921, where he married Josephine Dolan, a nurse he met while recovering from one of his many bouts of pulmonary tuberculosis. Too ill to continue work as a detective, he collected $80 a month in disability and began writing short stories for pulp fiction magazines at a penny a word.
He wrote about what he knew. He was not a writer trying to learn about detectives. He was a detective trying to figure out how to write.
Ross MacDonald once said that all of the hard-boiled writers came out from behind Hammett's Black Mask. My grandfather started in Black Mask magazine, which was the best of the pulps. Especially when Captain Joseph Shaw came on as editor, they became a cut above everything. So between the two of them, they elevated the genre.
I think that Hammett's big contribution was writing speech the way it was actually spoken. Before Hammett, detective fiction was all very elitist, upper crust. It was game-playing nonsense, you know. And Hammett, who had been a Pinkerton himself, he said, you know, I'm going to write about the people that I know, the way this stuff actually happens in the streets.
As Chandler said, Hammett took murder out of the drawing room and dumped it in the alley where it belonged.
By 1926, Hammett's battle with tuberculosis had not only forced him to quit work as a detective, but obliged him to live separately from his wife and daughters. It was in this self-imposed quarantine at 891 Post Street in San Francisco that Hammett would write his first three novels: Red Harvest, The Dane Curse, and The Maltese Falcon.
It's interesting to think about The Falcon being written in 1928. This is, of course, just prior to the Great Depression. I mean, the stock market prices were climbing. People were speculating on the market. Margin accounts were ready to collapse. And there was an increasing disconnect, I think, between real value and kind of subjective worth that people assign to things. It's also interesting that my grandfather worked in the advertising business, and for a jewelry store, no less. So he was doubly aware of how people can be attracted to this wealth, even though it's objectively doesn't necessarily worth very much. So I think that those experiences heightened his awareness of this kind of avaricious aspirations that people have. And certainly that's part of what drives the novel, is this hunt for wealth. But when you get it, it isn't what you thought it was going to be.
Oh, after 17 years.
When he submitted The Maltese Falcon to his editor at Alfred A. Knopf, he said,
Someday, somebody's going to turn the detective story into literature. And I'm just arrogant enough to think that I may be the one to do it.
Knopf published The Maltese Falcon in 1930. It was an immediate success. Hammett was recognized as a literary star on the level of fellow social realist Ernest Hemingway. Warner Brothers bought the motion picture rights to the book and produced 3 different versions of Hammett's story, each one a mere 5 years apart.
Of course, the earliest version of Maltese Falcon was made in 1931. That was surprisingly sexually explicit.
Don't you ever get lonesome?
Sometimes.
Originally named Woman of the World, the first version of the Maltese Falcon retained little of Hammett's hard-boiled realism.
I'll get breakfast ready if you run my bath for me.
That's fair enough, sugar.
Though director Roy Del Ruth's film was a financial success, its emphasis on Sam Spade, the playboy, left critics cold.
You have a lot of trouble with your women, don't you, Sam?
Head of production Hal Wallace felt that the Maltese Falcon's potential had been squandered, and in 1936, Warner Brothers remade the film starring Bette Davis as the femme fatale.
Oh, then you knew all the time that I'd killed him.
In the hands of director William Dieterle, the tone turned comic. The Falcon became a ram's horn. And Hammett's hard-boiled hero, Sam Spade, became grinning gumshoe Ted Shane.
Well, this is the best place in the world for a third degree. Isn't it, Roy?
We all say so.
The studio paid an office boy $25 when he created a clever name for the new film.
It was called Satan Met a Lady. It was a sort of a spin-off of Maltese Falcon, starring a now forgotten actor by the name of Warren William. And it was played according to traditional good guy, bad guy lines.
I plugged Farah and the Spaniard. And you're next. Hello, boys. Looking for me?
The picture was a flop. By all accounts, this should have spelled a final fade to black for the Maltese Falcon as a motion picture. Warner Brothers had adapted the book twice, only to see it fail both times. It would take a visionary producer, an unproven star, a largely unknown cast, and a first-time director to turn failure into success and make film history. Ironically, inspiration arrived in the efforts of another first-time director, working at rival studio RKO across town. Rosebud. Like Orson Welles, John Huston was a writer of some repute, who yearned to make his own debut as a director.
The story goes, which may or may not be true as all Hollywood stories, unless you were there. John Huston had worked rather happily for Howard Hawks. Hawks was impressed with Huston, and they were discussing the fact that Huston wanted to be a director. And Hawks supposedly told him to make the Maltese Falcon. He'd just shoot the book, he said.
I heard that John Huston told his secretary to take the book and type it up in screenplay form, and she did, and he was on vacation, and she put it on his desk, and Jack Warner came in the empty office and saw the script laying on the desk, took it back and read it, and gave it a go-ahead for production, and John Huston hadn't even seen it yet.
Now, Huston was given a chance because it was inexpensive. The people in it were, for the most part, contract players. It was all mostly interiors. So it was given a very short shooting schedule, and it was also given a very small budget.
Casting commenced in the spring of 1941. Huston and the Warner Brothers executives compiled a list that included 16 choices for the role of Sam Spade.
Huston always wanted Bogart. They had become close friends for some time, had worked on High Sierra. But the studio wanted George Raft. George Raft was still the bigger star, and it was only because George Raft refused the part that at the end Bogart got it, and of course I think changed his career and changed the way we look at detective movies.
You know, Raymond Chandler said later about Bogart that all Bogart has to do to dominate a scene is to enter it. You have to remember this was early on in Bogart's career. He wasn't as big a star when Maltese Falcon was made as Cagney or Eddie Robinson.
Is this the end of Rico?
Or George Raft.
Write a piece about me when you get out, will you? The name is Stacy. Life sentence.
I like to read my name in the papers.
They were all bigger stars than Bogart. Hard to believe now when Bogart dwarfs them all, sort of. But The Maltese Falcon was the first time that Bogart had that kind of leading role.
I guess I'm a sucker, but I just can't get it out of my nut.
George Raft, I think, single-handedly made Bogart's career. The key roles that made Bogart a star, Dead End, High Sierra, The Maltese Falcon, and even Casablanca were all offered to Raft first.
Fair enough. But I'd feel better about it if you'd have a drink with me.
This second-string actor from Warner Brothers, Humphrey Bogart, who'd been there for years playing villains in everybody else's picture, that just worked beautifully because it was the perfect marriage of a character to an actor. And Bogart was Sam Spade.
What have you ever given me beside money? Have you ever given me any of your confidence, any of the truth? Haven't you tried to buy my loyalty with money and nothing else?
What else is there I can buy you with?
When he first grabs Mary Astor, for instance, and he's very rough with her, there's a certain almost animalistic thing going on there with Bogart. You feel the force, the fury of the character.
I'll think again and think fast. I told that gunsel of yours you'd have to talk to me before you're through. I'm telling you now, you'll talk to me today or you're through. What are you wasting my time for? I can get along without you. And another thing, keep that gunsel out of my way while you're making up your mind. I'll kill him if you don't, I'll kill him.
I remember it was the first time I saw Bogart being the hero of the story, the good guy. Up to then, he'd always been the villain. And even though he was not altogether a good guy, in The Maltese Falcon, he also, that was, I think, when he crossed over from one thing into another, into being a leading man.
Bogey's secret, I think, was that he could do the tough thing, he could scare the crap out of you, but then he'd go all puppy-eyed on you. And the way he delivers those last lines, I mean, in the book, they're very cold, they're heartless. And you see someone's soul essentially spin into hell. In Bogey's version, it's more like you're seeing someone who's just desperate and wants to do the right thing and doesn't quite know what he's doing, and then sends her up the river. And you realize that Hammett's version is a man who realizes how cold he is. He's actually referred to as looking like Satan at the beginning of the book, whereas Bogey is a man whose heart has just been crushed and will never recover.
Listen, this won't do any good. You'll never understand me, but I'll try once and then give it up.
Casting the role of jovial villain Casper Gutman led John Huston to the Biltmore Theater, where he discovered Sidney Greenstreet, a 61-year-old stage actor who had never before worked in front of a camera.
He was so terrified. He was shaking on the set, and he asked Mary Astor to hold his hand. He said, please, please hold my hand. I'm so afraid I'm going to make a total ass out of myself. Well, look at the finished product.
This is going to be the most astounding thing you've ever heard of, sir. I say this knowing that a man of your caliber and your profession must have known some astounding things in his time.
There's some of those monologues that are just incredible. I mean, just the facial expressions, the pauses. You're like, wow, this guy is so inside his body. He's operating. If you're an actor, you really wish you could do stuff like that. He's got these beats that are unbelievable.
Now, sir, we'll talk if you like. I tell you right out, I'm a man who likes talking to a man who likes to talk.
The screen is filled with Sidney Greenstreet, and that was it. Stillness. Because everybody else, of course, is moving. Everybody else has got a rhythm. And Sidney is just sitting there really quietly and watching and talking.
That's an attitude, sir, that calls for the most delicate judgment on both sides.
Economy, and wonderful economy.
Now, come, sir, we've all failed, and there's no reason for expecting any of us to bear the whole brunt. In short, sir, I must ask you for my 10,000.
I think in some ways Sidney Greenstreet is the perfect villain, the model villain, the villain that villains are based upon.
And to you, Miss O'Shaughnessy, I leave the rare avis on the table there as a little memento.
In previous versions of the film, the role of Joel Cairo had been played either as straightforward or humorous.
This is jolly, isn't it?
John Huston wanted an actor who could do both.
Gardenia.
Quick, darling, in with him.
Will you come in, Mr. Cairo?
Born in what is now Slovakia, Peter Lorre ran away from home, studied acting in Vienna, and became famous portraying the child killer in Fritz Lang's 1931 film M. When the Nazis came to power, Lorre fled Europe and brought to America his odd demeanor, his wicked sense of humor, and his improvisational acting style.
You're not very polite today. You didn't ask me how I am. Look, the candies I like. I'll have a few. You don't mind? Have some popcorn? No. No? No.
Peter Lorre cited The Maltese Falcon as his finest film, but also his favorite film.
Oh, you want some assurance of my sincerity?
Besides giving him the opportunity to showcase his talent, it really opened the doors to Warner Brothers. Before that, he'd shuffled from studio to studio in a variety of low-budget productions.
See, Mr. Speed, I'm trying to recover ornament that, shall we say, has been mislaid. I thought and hoped you could assist me.
Joe Cairo is actually a gay character.
Mr. Speed, there is a boy outside.
But you couldn't do that then. So they just made him, I won't say effeminate, but they made him a little prissy.
This is the second time that you have laid hands on me.
When you're slapped, you'll take it and like it.
Sidney Greenstreet and Peter Lorre clicked so well in The Maltese Falcon, and with Bogart, they paired them again, either Bogart and Lorre or Bogart and Greenstreet and Lorre again.
You, what's your name?
Mattrack.
Obviously you are the leader. Suppose you tell us.
I'll speak for my friend.
Speak when you're spoken to.
Of course, anytime they needed a fat man who could be menacing and avuncular at the same time, they slotted in Greenstreet.
You don't feel any sorrier for Ugarte than I do.
Of course not. What upsets me is the fact that Ugarte is dead. No one knows where those letters of transit are.
If they needed someone who could be silkily menacing and whispering and duplicitous, they had Lorre.
I'm prepared to promise that, what is the phrase, no questions will be asked.
Houston's first choice for his femme fatale was Geraldine Fitzgerald. When she declined the part, it fell to an infamous leading lady.
The name's Wonderly.
Customer?
I guess so. You'll want to see her anyway. She's a knockout.
Sure in, Effie, darling. Sure in.
Will you come in, Miss Wonderly?
Mary Astor began acting in silent films as a teenager. At 17, she landed the starring role in the 1924 film Beau Brummel, opposite acting legend John Barrymore. The two began a torrid affair, though Barrymore was 14 years her senior. As her career soared, so did her reputation for scandal. In 1936, a sensational piece of gossip spread nationwide when her diary, full of juicy sexual details, was made public by an ex-husband. The notorious aura that surrounded Astor perfectly fed her successful star turn as Bridget O'Shaughnessy.
I haven't lived a good life. I've been bad. Worse than you could know.
Yeah, that's good, because if you actually were as innocent as you pretend to be, we'd never get anywhere.
I won't be innocent.
Mary Astor really reveled in the part.
Hey, what's this bird, this falcon that everybody's all steamed up about?
Supposing I wouldn't tell you anything about it at all. What would you do? Something wild and unpredictable?
I might.
She was actually playing up the Black Widow, the evil femme fatale, to the point that she was almost doing a parody of her personal life in the press, if you will. And she brought that to the part. I think that was very much something that she invested in that character, which I don't think another actress could have. And oh boy, is she scary in that part. I mean, she's beautiful, she's cunning, she's sweet, and yet she's fatal.
It's my own fault if you can't believe me now.
Now you are dangerous.
They all seemed to exist. So it wasn't a question of acting, it was a question of being. And that is perfectly illustrated in every bit of casting in The Maltese Falcon. The characters and the actors just meld to such a degree that you don't feel anybody's acting. That's one of the things that makes the picture great.
After rewriting the script to comply with production code censors, filming began on June 9, 1941. Watching the early rushes, executive producer Hal Wallace became concerned with the leisurely rhythm of Bogart's speeches. He instructed his young director to have Bogart pick up the pace. Houston, eager to please his veteran producer, immediately complied.
One of the delights of watching a film like The Maltese Falcon is the rapid-fire dialogue, the sense of hard-boiled dames and hard-boiled guys that talk in shorthand.
Sorry I got up on my hind legs, boys, but you fellas trying to rope me made me nervous. Miles getting bumped off upset me, and then you birds cracking foxy, but it's all right now that I know what it's all about.
As wonderful as that dialogue is, there's a whole bunch of the story that goes on behind the dialogue, the parts you can't see.
How do you feel now? Any better, Precious?
Much better. I'm frightened.
Don't be. Nothing very bad's going to happen here. You want a drink, Angel?
Be careful. I'm afraid. I don't know.
Ah, this is hopeless. If I don't know what you want done, I don't even know if you know what you want done.
I won't go to the police.
Go to them. All I got to do is stand still, and they'll be swarming all over me. All right, I'll tell them all I know, and you'll have to take your chances.
It's a movie that was very complicated to shoot. John Huston came up with an original way of doing the set for it. They managed to keep it on budget and on time. Henry Blanke, this is the producer on The Maltese Falcon, fit into a very well-oiled machine. People had jobs to do. They showed up every day, and they did them. Producers produced, and cameramen shot, and actors acted. And you would show up on Monday, and they'd say, this is what you're going to do, and you did it. It was a very efficient way to make films. They came down at the end, and the last scene, the whole climax of the film, in which every character in the film is there, is really a 35-page scene where it all comes together and we find out what happened.
Take your paws off me, or I'll make you use that gun. Ask your boss if he wants me shot up before we talk.
Henry Blanke went to Hal Wallace and had to argue and argue and argue to get an extra day so they could just set up the action for it.
Well?
If you're really serious about this, the least we can do in common politeness is to hear you out.
They said, give us an extra day of rehearsal just so we can light this properly, we can get the camera moves down, and so we can do it. But that foresight on his part to do that allowed the film to come in on time and on budget. And you got, as you know, when you see this film, this wonderfully, masterfully shot series of exchanges between the characters in this tiny room.
Give them Cairo.
Well, by guess.
And suppose we give them you and Miss O'Shaughnessy. How about that, huh?
You want the Falcon, I've got it. The Fall Guy's part of the price, I'm asking. As for Miss O'Shaughnessy, if you think she can be rigged for the part, I'm perfectly willing to discuss it.
And it's really a third of the movie.
Strikes me to be best for all concerned if we did not get out of each other's sight until our business has been transacted.
Not only was Huston's version of The Maltese Falcon a critical hit and box office smash, but it gave birth to a new and influential cinematic style, film noir.
John Huston, filming The Falcon, he completely embraced the essence of noir.
You aren't exactly the sort of a person you pretend to be, are you?
Huston managed to create a kind of synthesis where he brought together this wonderful book, but also the mood and the tension and the lighting, of course, which is so critical to film noir. It was a matter of incorporating attitude into visuals, and I think that's how he did it and how he set the standard for film noir.
The style and the content are very close together. It represents a world of extremes, of shadows, extremes in emotion.
Why don't you make him tell the truth?
I think it was quite striking when Maltese Falcon came out. Its use of black, the use of overexposure, hot highlights, and, rainy streets and smoky atmospheres.
John Huston's collaboration with cinematographer Arthur Edison represented the next step in the evolution of American film. It was a journey into the shadowy world of German Expressionism, a style that had emigrated to America with a legion of filmmakers fleeing Hitler's Germany. Its hallmarks included the bold use of light and shadow, dramatic camera angles, and a generally more pessimistic worldview.
One of the characteristics of film noir is to use a low camera angle.
You make it all right, or shall I carry you?
I'll be all right as soon as I get someplace where I can lie down.
And asymmetrical compositions. And if you look at the Maltese Falcon, you will see these everywhere. The one image that also comes to mind is when in the first scene, after the title sequence, which is largely just a couple of cards of the Bay of San Francisco, you go directly into Sam Spade's office, and there's a tremendous reflection of his sign, Spade and Archer. When Bridget O'Shaughnessy gets up to go to the door, you see the reflection that you had seen in its mirror image now spelled out on the floor. these juicy moments of filmmaking that adhere to a kind of vocabulary of its own is one of the delights of watching film noir. Going from the camera angle, we could also talk about the lighting, which was used beautifully, masterfully in the Maltese Falcon, where you have a high contrast between a light and a dark area in the screen, with very dramatic framing of that light that slashes across a face. And in a sense, it shows the disembodiment of the character visually. Not only do you have it in language and in his acting and in the actions of the film and the dialogue of the film, but you also have that sense of chaos in the image, of slashing through.
She didn't tell you what it is? Cairo didn't either?
He offered me $10,000 for it.
10,000.
Almost every time you see Gutman, he's shot from down below and looking up, so that bulk that he has is even greater. It's amplified by this, and it increases that kind of noir tension that's in there. That's a lot of what film noir is that the angles and the lighting that create a tension using visual means to amplify and to repeat what's going on inside.
Upstairs, Mr. Spade?
Yeah.
While film noir's dark mood is largely expressed through camera work and lighting, its bleak subject matter flows from its seedy underworld setting and the moral ambiguity of its lead character.
I think the Maltese Falcon is an essential evolution in the hero figure in American cinema, because it really is the first anti-hero, where the audience was asked to enjoy the attitude of a man who was not a good guy.
You get your business with Cairo over with, then we'll see how we stand.
And you let me go about it with him in my own way?
Oh, sure.
Sam Spade is an amazing character.
You are a godsend.
Well, now, don't overdo it.
What makes him stand out to me is his agonizing self-contempt.
Now, let's do something right for a change.
He's someone who cannot see himself doing any right. And even when he does, he sees it as wrong.
I really thought you do such wild and unpredictable things.
Don't be silly. You're taking the fall.
You have a character who is sleeping with his partner's wife and who is completely willing to lie, cheat, and steal to achieve his goals. He may be willing to make certain moral compromises.
Where were you the night Miles was murdered?
Home? I was.
No. But if that's your story, it's all right with me.
But he has a code, and he sticks to that code and will not break it for any reason.
Well, if you get a good break, you'll be out of Tehachapi in 20 years, and you can come back to me then. I hope they don't hang you, Precious, for that sweet neck.
At the end of the Maltese Falcon, the murders are solved, but the mystery of the treasure remains. In fact, the Falcon itself serves as something of a MacGuffin, feeding the character's greed while giving the tale its existential weight. In the end, the bird itself stands as Dashiell Hammett's fatalistic metaphor on the futile pursuit of wealth.
We've got it, Angel. We've got it.
The greed in the faces when the Falcon is finally brought into Spade's apartment near the end of the movie. The greed is just so incredible.
You never get ahead of it. It's always ahead of you. Even when you know it, it's still always ahead of you. It always has that little wonderful hook, that twist at the end, where it disappears, where all the focus just goes. And everybody sort of moves off. Oh, all right. I have to find something else of value. You think, wow, that's what life is. We put all our focus and attention on something we think we know, and we contrive and we scheme to accomplish it, and then at the end it simply disappears. And that's why. Great story.
For John Huston, Humphrey Bogart, and their collaborators, the treasure of the Maltese Falcon would prove more lasting, securing for each of them a permanent place in cinema history.
What is it?
The stuff that dreams are made of.
Huh?